the biting chill of late winter clung stubbornly to the small town, wrapping itself around the crooked streets and faded buildings like an unwelcome guest. The sun dipped early behind skeletal trees, casting long shadows that stretched across cracked sidewalks and flickering street lamps struggling to hold their light against the encroaching dusk. Amid this quiet scene, Michael, barely 18 and gaunt from months of hunger and hardship, wheeled his battered bicycle through the cold air. His threadbare jacket did little to shield him from the relentless wind that bit at his ears and slipped down the collar of his shirt. The bicycle, once belonging to his mother, was as worn as he was, its rusty chain creaking with every pedal stroke, the squeaky pedals threatening to give way beneath the weight of his exhaustion. Each turn of the wheel echoed like a countdown against the ticking clock. Tonight was different. The last delivery of the day hung heavy in his mind, the promise of enough money to pay rent for one more week weighing more than the cold air itself. Failure wasn't an option. He couldn't afford to lose the small room that had become his sanctuary, thin walls and all. Yet, as Michael pushed forward, the dim light caught something else. A solitary figure at the bus stop, draped in a worn beige coat, her silver hair tousled and eyes searching anxiously for a glimpse of familiarity. She stood frozen between hope and confusion, a fragile ghost in the gathering dusk. Something about her stillness stopped Michael mid-step, making him pause despite the pounding urgency in his chest. The wind whispered her uncertain words. Bus 12, Willow Lane. No, Garden Street? Soft and trembling, lost like her in this fading town. For a moment, the noise of the world receded, leaving only the fragile pulse of that quiet desperation. And in that suspended second, Michael knew that tonight's ride would be about more than just survival. It was about a choice that would stretch far beyond the cold streets and dimming lights, toward something no clock could measure. The night air grew heavier as Michael approached the lonely bus stop where the woman lingered like a forgotten memory. Her coat, once pristine but now threadbare and stained by years, wrapped her frail frame in a desperate attempt at warmth. Her silver hair, escaping the confines of a faded woolen hat, shimmered dimly under the weak glow of the flickering street lamp. She shifted uneasily, clutching a worn leather purse that seemed too heavy for her trembling hands. Her eyes darted between the empty road and the passing headlights, searching for a sign, a bus number, a familiar face that could guide her home. Every few steps, she shuffled closer to the curb, then hesitated, uncertainty clouding her features like a thick fog. The words she murmured, number 12, Garden Street, Willow Lane, were fragmented echoes, disjointed pieces of a puzzle lost to time. Around her, the world moved on, oblivious to her quiet desperation. Commuters rushed past, heads bowed over phones or weighed down by grocery bags, too busy or too distracted to notice the lonely figure trembling in the cold. But Michael saw her, really saw her, for the first time that night. Something in her stillness, the fragile weight of confusion and hope mixed in her gaze, stirred a part of him that had grown numb to the harshness around him. He paused, heart thudding with the urgency of deadlines and dwindling chances, yet unable to tear himself away. The clock in his mind ticked louder, each second a reminder of what he risked by lingering. Yet, as the wind whispered through the barren trees and carried her faltering voice to his ears, a quiet resolve settled in him. Without fully understanding why, Michael stepped forward, gently pushing his bicycle beside him, and broke the silence with a soft, tentative, "Are you all right, ma'am?" It was a small question, but in the stillness of that winter's night, it was the first thread of connection woven between two lost souls on the edge of darkness. Michael's breath hung in the icy air as he studied the woman's weary face, etched with lines carved by time and loneliness. Her eyes, clouded yet searching, flickered with a fragile glimmer of trust as she glanced up at him uncertainly, like a distant memory struggling to take shape. Her voice, soft and wavering, carried the weight of confusion as she whispered about missed buses and lost streets, a gentle confession of disorientation. "I was trying to get home," she said, words drifting like fragile snowflakes. "But I think I missed the bus. Or maybe it missed me." The brittle laugh that followed seemed to crack beneath its own weight, fragile as thin ice underfoot. Michael's heart tightened. He reached out instinctively, offering a small kindness in a world that had shown him too little. When he asked where she lived, the woman's fumbling fingers dug through a purse that had clearly known better days: a handkerchief, a chipped lipstick, coins scattered like forgotten memories, and an old bus transfer faded by time. No address, no clear sign of where home was. Just as hope began to waver, a delicate silver chain caught Michael's eye. A small oval pendant nestled softly against her coat. Leaning closer, he squinted at the elegant cursive engraved on its back: Margaret Whitman, 48 Oak Hill Drive, North Side. Recognition sparked in his chest. Oak Hill, far beyond the edges of town, nearly 2 hours by bike, and most of it uphill. The clock in his mind screamed. He'd miss the delivery, lose the rent, lose the room. But when their eyes met, hers soft and clouded but touched with a childlike trust, Michael felt something deeper than logic settle inside him. Some choices were heavier than others, not because they made sense, but because they carried the weight of humanity. With a quiet, forced smile, he said, "That's a bit far, but I think we can make it." Helping her carefully onto the back rack of his bicycle, he wrapped her in his jacket and tied his spare scarf tight. "Hold on tight," he said gently. "We'll take it slow." She chuckled, dazed but grateful, and in that fragile moment, two lives began to intertwine on a cold winter's night. As Michael's legs pushed the pedals against the biting chill, the world around them seemed to blur into a canvas of muted grays and deepening shadows. The town's familiar lights faded behind them, swallowed by the night as they ventured further into the cold unknown. Margaret, wrapped snugly in his worn jacket and scarf, perched carefully on the rickety bike's backrack, her frail fingers gripping the metal with a mix of apprehension and trust. Every creak and groan of the old bicycle echoed through the stillness, a rhythmic pulse driving them forward against the relentless wind that whispered secrets through the skeletal trees. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding, uphill, and lined with frost-kissed fields that slept beneath a thin veil of silver. Moonlight spilled over frozen bridges, casting pale reflections that danced and shattered with every turn. Margaret hummed a soft, haunting tune that floated in the air between them, sometimes fading into silence, only to be broken by her gentle questions about their whereabouts. Each time, Michael replied with patient reassurance, his voice steady despite the numbness creeping into his hands and legs. "We're getting closer," he said softly, "just over the next hill." The cold pressed against his skin like 1,000 tiny needles, but the thought of leaving her alone in the dark fueled his determination. At a small roadside gas station, with the last dollar clenched tightly in his pocket, Michael bought a warm cup of tea. Margaret insisted he take the first sip, her eyes soft with concern and kindness. "You need it more," she whispered, her voice carrying the warmth of a mother's gentle scold. Refreshed by the brief pause and the shared moment of comfort, Michael mounted the bike again, renewed for the final stretch. When the whitewashed gate of 48 Oak Hill finally came into view, its chipped paint and curling ivy standing as silent witnesses to 1,000 forgotten stories, relief washed over him like the first break of dawn. His legs screamed in protest, his hands numb and trembling, but he exhaled deeply and knocked, knocks that would unlock not just a door, but the fragile threads of a new beginning. The heavy gate creaked open, revealing a figure bathed in the warm glow of the porch light, an elderly man in a worn housecoat, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. "Margaret, oh my God, where have you been?" His voice cracked, trembling with a mix of panic and exhaustion as he ushered her inside. Margaret glanced around, momentarily disoriented, her gaze softening into a tired smile. "I suppose I went for a walk. Or maybe a ride," she murmured, the weight of the night's confusion still lingering in her voice. Michael stood silently just behind her, watching the reunion unfold with a quiet sense of accomplishment he hadn't expected to feel. The man's hands shook as he clasped Margaret's, repeatedly thanking Michael, his gratitude as palpable as the warmth filling the room. "Please come in. Warm yourself," he insisted. "Have something to eat. We'll get you home safely." But Michael shook his head, fatigue and the cold etched deep into his bones, whispering that it was time to leave. Before he stepped back outside into the night, Michael scribbled his number onto a torn receipt, pressing it into the man's hand with a simple promise: "If you ever need help again." As the door closed behind him, a cold gust swept over the quiet estate. and Michael's thoughts turned to the warmth he had left behind. The fragile trust, the soft laughter, and the unexpected connection that had blossomed in the darkest hours. The ride back was a stark contrast to the journey there. Without Margaret's gentle presence and the weight of responsibility, the night felt lonelier, the wind sharper as it whistled through bare branches. Each bump in the road sent jolts up through the handlebars and into his aching limbs. Yet, despite the solitude, Michael's heart felt strangely lighter. He carried with him something no longer just about survival, but about kindness, a seed planted deep within, ready to grow. As he neared the edge of town, the faded glow of gas station lights and the soft hum of distant life greeted him. But the night had already changed. So had he. Michael's fingers fumbled through the empty pockets of his worn jacket, a sinking dread settling in his chest as the cold night pressed in around him. The familiar weight of the key was gone, vanished without a trace. At first, he thought it must be a mistake, a careless slip. But after searching every corner, every seam, the painful truth settled like frostbite. The key was lost. He approached the door of his small room with tentative hope, only to be met with the harsh reality of a cold, unyielding lock. No amount of knocking stirred a response. The darkness behind the door was absolute, swallowing any light or warmth he might have clung to. Then his eyes caught the plastic grocery bag resting beside the entrance, his meager belongings tossed out like yesterday's refuse. A torn note was taped firmly to the door, the words "past due, locks changed" scrawled in thick, unforgiving letters. The note seemed to mock his struggles, a stark sentence that turned his fragile world upside down. His breath hitched, caught somewhere between anger and heartbreak, but neither curse nor tears came. Instead, he stood frozen, bike leaning heavily at his side, muscles trembling not just from the bitter cold, but from the crushing weight of displacement. The street was silent, the town asleep as if indifferent to the plight of one lost soul. With a slow, reluctant turn, Michael pushed away from the door and back into the night, the icy wind biting deeper now, seeping into his bones and chilling the thin layer of hope he'd carried all day. There was nowhere left to go. No sanctuary from the creeping cold, only the endless stretch of darkened streets and the hollow ache of loneliness. Yet, despite the bitterness of loss, his legs found the pedals once more. Movement was survival. Forward was all he knew. And so, with a heavy heart and numb fingers, Michael rode again, into the night, into uncertainty, propelled by a stubborn flicker of something that refused to die. Michael's breath came in ragged clouds as he pedaled slowly through the darkened streets, each rotation of the wheel a small rebellion against the biting cold that threatened to freeze his very soul. His body ached from the relentless ride to the Whitman estate and back, but there was no rest to be found, no room to return to, no warm bed waiting behind locked doors. The town felt vast and empty, swallowed by winter's unforgiving grip. Eventually, his weary eyes caught sight of a faint flicker of light behind the back alley of Carter's Market, a modest corner store that had become a rare refuge in this unforgiving world. With a hesitant knock on the side door, Michael waited, heart pounding like a drum in the silent night. The door creaked open to reveal Mr. Carter, the store's gruff but kind-hearted owner, draped in a heavy robe and holding a steaming mug that smelled faintly of something sharp and strong. His gaze softened as it landed on Michael's shivering frame, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, and the raw exhaustion of a soul pushed to its limits. "Didn't make rent, huh?" he muttered, not unkindly, a statement weighted with quiet understanding. Without waiting for an answer, Mr. Carter glanced toward the sky, as if willing the heavens to intervene, then stepped aside. "The storeroom's dry," he said. "There's a cot in the corner. Don't touch the wine crates, and don't freeze to death on me." Relief washed over Michael like a sudden warmth, filling the hollow spaces left by the night's harshness. The storeroom smelled of cardboard and citrus, its silence broken only by the gentle groan of an old radiator struggling to fend off the cold. Pulling the thin blanket over his shoulders, Michael allowed himself to collapse onto the narrow cot, limbs heavy and heart slow but strangely quiet. For the first time in weeks, the terror of the night softened, and the world, though cold and unkind, felt just a little less jagged. The pale light of dawn had barely begun to seep through the cracked window panes when the soft chime of the store's doorbell stirred Michael from his restless sleep. He blinked against the lingering shadows, the warmth from the thin blanket fading fast as reality crept back in with its cold edges. Behind the counter, the familiar creak of footsteps announced a visitor, someone unexpected yet unmistakably familiar. There she was, Margaret Whitman, no longer the fragile, lost woman from the bus stop, but clothed simply in a soft wool shawl, her eyes searching the dim corners of the market until they found him. Her presence seemed to fold the space between them with gentle authority, a quiet promise of change and connection. Michael's heart tightened as he straightened instinctively, hands fidgeting with the worn fabric of his jeans, unsure how to meet her gaze. "I hope you don't mind me coming again," she said softly, her voice warmer than the early morning light. "I've been thinking about you all night." The honesty in her words hung between them like a fragile bridge, inviting and tentative. She spoke of the big house on Oak Hill Drive, of how it had never felt so empty, so silent as it did that morning, even after all the years and losses that had filled it. "You remind me of him," she confessed, her eyes reflecting a deep, aching kindness. His gentleness, his way of listening more than speaking. The memory seemed to breathe life into the room, stirring something dormant within Michael. Then, with careful hands, Margaret unfolded a piece of stationery, inked with trembling lines that spoke of hope rather than obligation. "This isn't a contract," she said, "just an invitation. An offer of shelter, support, and a chance to find footing. No strings attached, just kindness extended to a soul who had already given so much without asking for anything in return." In that quiet moment, the cold world outside seemed to pause, making room for something new to begin. The afternoon sun cast long golden rays through the towering oaks lining Oak Hill Drive as Michael followed David up the winding path to the Whitman estate. The grand white house stood not as a cold monument, but as a softened memory, its chipped paint and ivy-covered walls telling stories of years past. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the scent of old books and polished wood, a stark contrast to the harshness Michael had known for so long. Seated by the window was Margaret, transformed from the frail, wandering woman of the night before into someone with a quiet strength and gentle command. Her eyes, sharp and clear, lit up with a radiant smile the moment she saw Michael. "You," she breathed, her voice trembling just enough to reveal the depth of her gratitude and emotion. "You brought me home." She reached for his hands with a grip both tender and insistent, grounding them both in the shared truth of that night's journey. "I remember everything," she said softly. "Every street, every word. You didn't treat me like a stranger. You made me feel safe." Michael, overwhelmed, bowed his head, the weight of her praise heavier than any burden he'd carried. Yet Margaret wasn't finished. Leaning forward, her eyes searched his with an earnestness that cut through years of loneliness. "I don't know your story," she whispered, "but I'd like to. And if you don't have a place to go, I would be honored to offer you one here. Not just for tonight, but for longer, if you'd let me." The offer hung in the air, generous beyond words, stirring something uncertain within Michael. His voice was low but steady as he replied, "That's kind of you, really. But I didn't do this for anything in return. I just wanted you to be safe." Margaret's gaze did not waver. "And that," she said softly, "is exactly why I want you to stay." In the gentle silence that followed, neither moved, but the quiet between them brimmed with a newfound hope, a beginning neither could yet fully understand, but both quietly embraced. Michael settled into the rhythm of his new life with a quiet determination that surprised even himself. The grand estate, once an intimidating fortress of privilege, softened under the warmth of shared purpose and gentle companionship. His sunlit room overlooked the sprawling gardens where early morning light kissed dew-soaked petals, a daily reminder that beauty could grow even in the most unlikely places. Days were filled with moments of learning and healing. Long conversations with Margaret over steaming cups of tea, afternoons spent wandering the greenhouse where fragile seedlings stretched toward the sun, and evenings quietly reading books he once thought unreachable. With Margaret's unwavering support, Michael returned to school, the scholarship quietly arranged in his name, a testament to her belief in his potential. Together, they founded the Willow Light Fund, a small but resolute beacon for those caught between shadows and hope, young people without paths or shelter, elders forgotten by the world, and anyone searching for dignity amidst hardship. Michael poured his heart into the foundation, meeting counselors, designing programs, and working part time at the community center, each step a stitch, weaving a new tapestry of purpose. Yet, despite all the change, he still found solace in the familiar, the creak of his old bicycle as he rode through town, not out of necessity, but as a quiet homage to where he had begun. Passing the worn bus stop where it all started, he would slow, tip his head toward the sky, and smile. Because sometimes home isn't found, it finds you. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness, given without expectation, can grow into a light strong enough to change the course of a life forever.